Hello and welcome. My name is Margit Bantowsky. I am a Trillium Awakening teacher and a transformative life coach. And I also have a YouTube channel and website called Awakened Activism. Today, the exploration I want to take us into is awakening leadership. And I have a very special guest that I'm super excited about. My friend and colleague Pat Keating, who has been in the Trillium path for many, many years and also has had quite a bit of experience in the leadership world. We've been wanting to have this conversation for quite a while, and I'm delighted that it's happening. So, Pat, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Margit. You've done a pretty good job. I've been in the work of waking down in Trillium for 15, 20 years. No worse for the wear, I don't think. And once upon a time in my professional life, played around in the sandbox of leadership development, mostly academically, and then headed up leadership programs for Cisco Systems worldwide for a while, and also headed up leadership and talent development for at Stanford for the Stanford staff for several years. So that's enough of my background.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so today, part of what I want to dive into, and was hoping to do that with you, is this: what is it? What do we mean by awakening leadership or awakened leadership? And kind of sensing into, both of us have been in roles of leadership roles for decades, and what has awakening? Oopsie. Pat disappeared.
So you were talking.
Yeah. So the question that I'm wanting us to start with is what do we mean by awakening, and how has awakening impacted us as leaders? What has it given us? So I can start just really briefly. What we mean by awakening in the Trillium Path is the fusion of consciousness, embodiment with our body, and in mutuality, relatedness. So we're not awakening up, and away from the world of human mess and the material dimension. We're actually awakening into our bodies, into this world, and recognizing the non-separate nature of our being. So this deep interconnectedness, sense of interbeing, and having consciousness really fused with our embodied self. And I think, for me, some of the things that have really shifted is that I've gotten more relaxed in my core. And because of that, I have sort of, I'm an engineer by past trade and education. And so there's a way I like to control and measure and map and strategize, which are really good skills for a leader, but I tend to, can tend to over control. And there's something about this awakening that's allowing my being to relax and be more fluid and responsive. So that's one of the characteristics that I've noticed. So for you, how do you experience the awakening, and what's something that it's given you?
Yeah, really, it's the work in Trillium and waking down is, I think, first and foremost, been a path of movement out of the head and into the heart, and into the whole body, really. Uh, and and in that process, I've the one word that comes to me around transformation and opening is aliveness. Just a kind of an aliveness, sensual aliveness. The rapture of being alive, the rupture of being alive. It's just a wildness. It's an openness. It's an uncontrolled kind of madness. And figuring out, or even have the motivation to figure out what that means for leadership is quite a challenge. Because I've come through to leadership through the head. And as I've, not left the head behind, but put less focus there, I've also, it's challenged, me to, about, what leadership is. Or, whether it really has any bearing on, what leadership is. So we can explore that. I don't know what we'll find together, but should be fun.
I love that. I love that, Pat. I don't know what we'll find together. And that's it, right? That's the spaciousness, that relaxed spaciousness at the core, the willingness and surrender to mystery.
Mm.
I don't know where our conversation's going to go. I have a few pencil scribbled notes, and that's great. So this awakening allows me to be deeply present. And I love this thing that you said about sensing. I'm sensing into you, I'm sensing into myself, I'm sensing into the space between us and beyond us, and noticing what wants to be spoken through me. When I'm in a leadership position, I'm sensing into the group field, if there's a group, and what wants to move through me into that shared space when I'm wearing a hat, when I have the role of a facilitator, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, those functions have to be performed, and they serve a very useful purpose or function. So um, let's see where we can take this. So, what do your notes say?
Well, I was one of the things I've been chewing on, because I've been doing this awakened activism work now, a YouTube channel for a couple of years, and working on a book on this. And one of the things that I am kind of circling around is, what capacities does embodied consciousness awakening in mutuality, in relatedness, what capacities does it give me more access to?
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? And how those capacities serve us as leaders. So I mentioned one about um, being more trusting, more relaxed in mystery,
Hmm.
which allows me to be more fluid, more responsive, and less of a dictator. I have a very dictatorial background. My parents were European. I was born in Germany. That whole precision protocol, yeah, genau, get it straight. So the awakening has allowed me, that trust has allowed me to be more curious, more responsive. So those are some capacities, that curiosity and fluidity and trust. So yeah, what capacities are you sensing from that? I mean, access to the heart you mentioned, but yeah, what more?
Yeah, it's trusting the body, trusting. It seems like that's immediate um, and yeah, it's just immediate and undoubtable. Somehow the thinking mind has this element of doubt associated with it. Going back to, my work, in a corporate world, One of the things one question I thought of asking you, and I've asked myself as well, from a Trillium perspective, um, what does Trillium have to say that's additive to conventional notions of leadership? What does it have to say that might be subversive to traditional notions of leadership? And for me, it's been mostly on the subversive side. That may be my personality, but you know, I sort of grew my, I'm looking for the right expression there, but I grew up in the leadership space in a corporate environment where, and in a, good corporations, high-minded, you might even say enlightened corporations, but the focus was still on, you know, delivering, economic results in pursuit of economic goals, and so it's leadership in getting that result and, improving the bottom line and, getting the product out the door in terms of, satisfying the customer experience, but all in the interest of some kind of economic goal. And as I went through various spiritual openings, that became just less and less of interest to me, right? And it's like, okay, so what is it? And I had a very, I was challenged to figure out how to incorporate, uh, to understand what my voice might be around this. So things were sort of discombobulating and subverting. And it's like, okay, what does this all mean for leadership and how we teach leadership and the end game of leadership? And I had a very difficult time integrating my personal openings with my professional responsibilities. It was not easy. I didn't find that to be an easy thing to, and I had people approaching me, people in the sort of new agey kind of space. And, being the very pragmatic, I also have an engineering background. It was like, that's fine, but none of my audience is going to be interested in hearing about that stuff, right? They've got, they've got, they've got goals they have to meet. And so it became quite a bit of a disjuncture of, figuring out how these things do line up, if they do line up. So I don't know what that might trigger in you, if you've experienced any of that.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. Thank you for naming that. I forgot. You know, we adjust to the new normal and forget what happened in the past. So yeah, I remember. I'd been studying psychology. Almost got a doctorate in psychology. Also went into an intensive coaches training program because I decided to do life coaching instead of psychotherapy. And I left my engineering job to launch my coaching practice, life coaching practice. And somewhere along the way, I came across Waking Down in Mutuality before it became Trillium, and had my whole being realization and my awakening. And I actually could not do traditional coaching for a couple years. The dissonance was so big um, because coaching is predicated on goals. And the whole structure of achieving goals and that mechanistic worldview of just take these steps, and if you fall down, get the heck back up, and solve those problems, and there's no excuse to not getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Trillium Waking Down frame, we would call that the hypermasculine impulse, the hypermasculine drive to control, manipulate, manage, repair, fix, strategy upon strategy. And in the whole being realization, there's that incredible dissipation into the field of being where that striving impulse isn't how life works, not that way. and the incongruity between the inner resting place of being, of awakened being, and that gap with the conventional coaching was too big for me. I couldn't do it for years. I can do it now, and the way that I do it now is I hold everything lightly. I might suggest some next steps or invite the coaching client to come up with their next steps. And then I see their goals as a path towards awakening. So whatever's in the way is the way, right? So the context for failure, the context for mistakes is completely reframed. What's right and wrong is completely reframed because mystery trumps everything and reality trumps everything. So it's been a massive reconfiguration in it. I couldn't do it for quite some time.
Yeah, so even taking that idea of mystery, you think about it through a leadership lens, right? A straight and narrow conventional leadership lens. Leadership is all about mission. It's about defining mission and then strategy that, the how of delivering on mission and then executing and delivering results. Yet from a maybe a trillium or a spiritual point of view, it's all about mystery. So how does one, as a leader, do the dance of mission and mystery, uh, both in one's own life and then in terms of, say, organizational life? How to incorporate, really, like you said, mystery trumps. Well, if mystery trumps, and then what does that really mean for how we lead? And I've got a lot of questions, but not a lot of answers.
And that is appropriate, right? This is a new edge.
Mhm.
We're on the edge of a new way of doing and being. We don't have the answers, but we have a lot of questions. And so we get to live the questions. And maybe the most productive thing we can do in this conversation is to illuminate the questions for the whoever's listening.
Yeah. Another edge for me. I probably mentioned this to you in various contexts. I don't know, but one of my realizations, and it's really a practice for me at this point. One of the lovely disciplines that I've really enjoy maybe the most out of waking down Trillium is the idea of green lighting. Uh, and the, possibly the biggest opening for me was realizing, coming into unexpectedly, talk about the mystery of mutuality, waking down in mutuality. However it occurred, I came into, what happened for me over time was a kind of, the first felt sense of something different was a felt sense. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't an idea, it was an opening in the heart. And it was this kind of strange kind of sense of a kind of a, just a kind of a tiny little hole in my chest area. And that developed over time, to the point of a kind of having the opening, ecstatic openings, in mutuality with others, just uncontrollable crying in the awe and ache of existence, and realizing that that's who I am. That's who I am. That's who I was born as. And there's some kind of soul thing maybe there, but and then, okay, how do I greenlight that? If that's who I am, I've come home. That's who I am. Then my life's practice becomes greenlighting that, because I've been shutting that off and down and clamping that and cinching that and doing all kinds of things unconsciously and probably consciously to just censor myself, a kind of self-censorship. Well, what does that have to do with What does ecstasy have to do with leadership? Well, for me, it's everything. You know, if mystery trumps, so does ecstasy, by the way. And I have a kind of my own view of what ecstasy means because that's another loaded term. But the point is, you know, okay, you're talking about Trillium. For me, that's what Trillium has opened up. And so, how the heck do I? And it's by its nature, it's wild. You know, so how does the wild? How do you get the wild? You know, how do you get that in a container so you can uh, you can you can uh, like you know, putting running water in a container, right? It's no longer running water. So uh, how do you package that and sell that, you know, for leaders? People who want to be leaders. I'm not sure. It's almost like, and I apologize if we're going in directions that aren't particularly productive, but it's almost like, you know, you would know this as an engineer, the idea of an orthogonal relationship, right? It's almost like that's what happened to me in spiritual opening. You know, I was going like this and struggling and, you know, not, you know, making my way in the world, but you know, as I clamped down on, you know, who I really am and that opened up, it's really, you know, how I view myself is almost orthogonal to how I, you know, functioned in the workaday world. And so it's like, can I, you know, do anything to sort of make these parallel and integrated in some way? Are they orthogonal? And they always will be orthogonal. I don't know.
Wow, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I was reading a book. I just opened it because it's been a wonderful book for me. Because what's opened up is not only mystery, but myth. For some reason, I got very, very drawn into myth because I found that myths somehow capture. Campbell has this phrase I can't quote it, but it's basically that myths capture the conflicting energies of the body, um, the primitive conflicts and simultaneities, you know, the body. But I got uh, I got into myth through Michael Mead, who showed up at Stanford one uh, day as part of a special kind of seminar they were running for the undergraduates, but also a man named Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw is truly one of the world's greatest storytellers, but he has a book, and the name of the book is A Branch from the Lightning Tree. And the subtitle is Ecstatic Myth and the Grace in Wildness. And I saw him tell a story one afternoon, Friday afternoon. My wife calls me, who's not into any of this stuff at all, but she says, "Hey, there's a seminar this Friday afternoon, and it's I don't know how she came upon it. She's she's good at that stuff, but it was Coleman Barks, who is somebody that you may know, who one of his claims to fame is his Rumi translations. But he was holding a seminar with this Martin Shaw at the church, which is on the quadrangle of Stanford University. So it was a conversation of Coleman Barks and Martin Shaw. And I didn't know who the hell Martin Shaw was, but I knew who Coleman Barks was. So I went. Well, it ended up being all about Martin Shaw. And he told this wonderful story with his, you know, drum, and it blew me away. It was transformative. It was catalytic. It was on the order of the openings I've had in Waking Down, and so it drew me into myth as a way to. They're almost like koans. They're ways of grappling with the mystery of manifestation. And so anyway, I got drawn into kind of, but I love his book because it really sort of draws on ecstatic myth. Because the thing that I've been grappling with since I've had these openings and is again how to what the hell, you know, do I just wander around in nature and see what happens, or what does this mean for service, let's say, that kind of thing. So, but I probably I'm going too far afield here.
No, 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 no. I think we are dropping into the field deeply. This is beautiful. Thank you. I'm reminded of David White, the poet that lives in the
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest, and he's done a lot of bringing the poetic, mythopoetic into corporation, and the wildness. So the soul and imaginal dimension of self, the meaning making, the symbology, that meta level of our collective psyche is powerful and is part of the movement and part of, you know, the territory of being human. Being in, so that baseline is fabulous. I think that dropping into whole being realization, that it takes it to the next level, because the myth is in a numinous space. The myth is in the twilight, in between, right? It bridges the material and non-material worlds. That's what's so powerful about poetry and mythology. And so those technologies of spirit, of poetry and myth, are like portals. But what happens in awakening is we actually go through the portal and we land there and we live from there.
Yeah.
We live
No, that's nice.
with direct, stable contact to the numinous, to the beyond. We are the beyond and we are the present. And then there's this quality of non-separation. That's part of it too, of being embedded in the fabric of life, embedded with all other beings. And so that kind of brings me back to the beginning of what you were just sharing just now, of how you had that opening in the heart and then it widened and widened. And this whole thing about mutuality and the ecstatic of being in mutuality, that I think is critical. I think that was Saniel's one of Saniel's many gifts. Saniel is the founder of Waking Down in Mutuality, which eventually led to the Trillium Path, which is a separate branch that emerged out of Saniel's work. My computer's dying. So what mutuality, so we awaken into non-separation, which means we awaken into relatedness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a huge piece of new leadership, of this new edge of leadership. What happens when our heart is open, when we're undefended? We can have access to compassion. We can have access to other points of view. We can actually have access to the capacity to acknowledge our impact on others, our impact socially and our impact environmentally to the more than human world, the other beings that we share the planet with. So when I have a definition for awakened activism, and I think it relates to awakened leadership, awakened activism is action on behalf of the wellness of all beings, sourced in the love and trust arising from a consciously embodied union with all of life. Awakened activism becomes most fully expressed as spiritual, social, and environmental awakening mature in an individual. So this gift of dropping in this very visceral, naked way into relationship, mutuality, is ecstatic. And you said awe and ache, right? So we then see the magnificence and the struggle, the suffering. And what I'm curious about is, what does that call us? What does that call forth in us. If I'm no longer repressing my awareness of my impact on other people and other animals and plants and the planet, if I'm not suppressing that, what's called forth from an undefended? And then the ecstatic, the wildness is, well, it's a fucking wild place here. The earth is a wild ride, and polarities exist, right? So what if we had the capacity to ride the wildness of the polarities that will be in every group? For example, the continuum between structure and fluidity. That's a polarity, and there are people who are pro-structure and people who are so into fluidity that they can't handle, even the tiniest rules, right? Every group is going to have a constellation of opposites, and I think the ecstatic allows us to not pathologize that. And the myths allow us to not pathologize that. We actually, maybe we can thrive there somehow.
Yeah. In that, call it a dance, call it what you will. But, yeah, how do we act in service to a calling or what have you? And how do we, there's the seriousness of it, I guess. One thing you were asking as well, what's one thing that showed up for you in a different way around how you lead these days? And it's humor. It's, just, and I'm not exactly sure why, but it is the sort of, maybe it's the cosmic joke and keeping that alive in any, because there seems to be such a flattening out as the focus moves to, okay, now what does this all mean for how we lead and how we live a life of service? And it's sort of, for me anyway, it seems to sort of collapse really quickly, and the juice just sort of is sucked out of out of the equation, so to speak, if I can mix a metaphor here. Equation, it's interesting that equations can have juice too, huh? But in any event, yeah. So for me, it's and you had mentioned keeping it light. I think you were using that more in terms of a light touch, not, but the idea of not taking it too seriously or too definitively, right? So for me, I think humor is and wonder. Um, at one of the Transfiguration retreats, there's a book I love by Abraham Heschel. It's called "I Ask for Wonder." Abraham Heschel is now dead, but he is well known as a sort of uh, activist mystic rabbi. A wonderful, wonderful writer, but he has a small book of aphorisms called "I Ask for Wonder." And at one Transfiguration retreat, I took, because that's kind of what opens up for me at the heart of it's the wound and the wonder of the ecstatic, the full current of life. And but so humor and wonder, and how to keep those at the forefront of any sort of undertaking where you're, and leadership is ultimately about, taking on some kind of challenge and then connecting with others and taking them with you on that journey, right? To somehow addressing whatever the challenge might be, and so humor and wonder for me are first and foremost. And I experimented with those things when I started opening up, and I was leading a team at Stanford. And I remember specifically an offsite we had down near Half Moon Bay on, the Bay Area of San Francisco, Northern California. And I tried to incorporate some of those energies, and with mixed. It's an experiment. It's always an experiment with mixed results with my team. But in any event, those are things that, and humility, around mystery. One of the things that comes out of, when you start realizing, friggin' understand or know anything, is the humility of that. And so, yeah, but how can you incorporate those elements without subverting? Maybe you do. You're subverting and getting, your team to see things in a different way in yourself. But you can get in your own way with some of this stuff and get too cute and not get stuff done. But then there's always, maybe we're too busy trying to get stuff done. I'm still not convinced it's almost like what we've learned in the pandemic is when we stop doing things, the world gets better in certain ways. You gotta call off all those lives of purpose that are killing us. I told you I'd be subversive.
It's great. Actually, I think hoping, realization, awakening, spiritual awakening is deeply subversive. Really, truly. I think humility is subversive. I think vulnerability is subversive. Authenticity is subversive.
Yeah, and what that really means, I was reading a book by Mirabai Starr called Wild Mercy. And it's really a book. She considers herself a kind of feminist mystic, and she's translated, the lives of St. John and Teresa of Avila and others. She's quite well versed in Western feminine mystics. And, there's a lot of subversion in there. Yeah, so I've thought of myself as, well, maybe I am a monk and my monastic tendencies are there, but even these feminine monastics were led deep lives of service, deep lives, and some, she was talking about one who burned at the stake for her beliefs, not willing to back down. So that's the ultimate subversion and being, and paying the price for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I don't take these things lightly, although I don't pretend to have the kind of courage that these individuals. And that's another trait that becomes maybe it was most difficult for me, is that I didn't have the courage. I haven't had the courage. I'm still working on it. Of how partly it's courage and partly it's voice. It's partly figuring out, well, if I'm in some kind of orthogonal relationship right now to how I held myself in the past and what my professional calling cards were, right, leadership and whatever else. How do I integrate these things? How do I take what I've experienced and realized and bring it forth? I haven't, quote unquote, figured that out yet, and I have less and less of in a sense, a felt sense that I have to figure it out or do something about it. But on the other hand, part of it is having the courage to give voice to that, right? Not hold back for fear of this isn't going to make sense, or nobody's going to care, or they're going to call you stupid, or whatever, the stupid reasons might be for holding back. But that's the story of my life. So that's my first step, actually, has been, okay, I'm going to claim my closet ecstatic nature and keep claiming it and hope it'll keep opening me up.
That's beautiful. I mean, that seems like a critical first step, is that claiming. Before we can speak our truth, we got to know our truth. When I hear you talk about, that courage piece, that's one of the qualities I think awakening can give us access to, having more contact with our truth, and then a more impulse to authenticity. Right, that tends to come online. It becomes an imperative. The imperative to integrate and soften all that conditioning, all the social conditioning, and letting that the hum, the vibration, the expression of our uniqueness dance. That's the ecstatic, the dance of being me, Margit's uniqueness. But then the mutuality practice is, like Samuel said it so beautifully, I get to be my true and total nature, my, awakened, infinite, beautiful soul self, and the imperfect, lumpy, bumpy, quirky as all get out human form.
Mhm.
And I get to, and I make room for you to do the same. You get to be Pat. You get to have your, lumps and bumps and brilliances and challenges, and your radiant wholeness. And in mutuality, we let ourselves show up authentically as best we're able. So there's that invitation. I think there's an irresolvable rub, or it's so easy to idealize doing mutuality perfectly, but there's a dance between being really honest, and then if I'm really respectful of you, sensing into what you can and can't hear, where you are. There's this idea of developmental rights. We have the right to be where we are at developmentally. So I'm not going to, come to you and bludgeon you with my truth and authenticity if I have a sense that it's not a capacity that you have. You're not there yet. So when we are with a group of people who don't have a lot of bandwidth for the depth dimension, the archetypical, mythological dimension, spiritual dimension of being, trying to bombard them with that is really disrespectful. It's not being in mutuality. So how to be courageous and creative and respectful and humble, right? It's quite an amalgam, quite a lot of threads to dance with.
Yeah, so it's this sort of cycle as you open in whatever ways you open spiritually. It um, it changes your sense of yourself and your sense of the world and your sense of what's I was going to say what's important, and that's probably true, but yeah, and how you and what it's meaningful to work on, right? To what it's the being doing thing, right? And from a leadership standpoint, uh, just helping. I would imagine one of the values would be helping people discover, gain greater and greater insight, open to who they are and how they identify themselves, and then what kind of uh, vision or sense of purpose emerges out of that, and then from that, okay, what is it? What is it worthwhile to do? Uh, and that sort of dance of insight and action, of being and doing, of and being in that dance and that swirl and that twirl. And how then you engage others. I think of, it would be interesting to think of somebody like Rumi through a lens of leadership. Does that even make sense? A wild, mystic poet, mystic or whatever, how ecstatic, sort of in many ways, the embodiment of the ecstatic poet, right? Or the poet ecstatic or whatever. Okay, does leadership kind of play into that at all? People followed him. To me, it's a role model of not self-censoring, right? So, that seems to be sort of one of my paths, which is, stop doing that, God damn it.
Mm-hmm.
Stop censoring. And then obviously, and also part of the censorship is, thinking through the lens of a Rumi, I kind of wonder whether any of those poems came out of purpose or outline or goal, but just, ecstatic renderings, I would imagine, but I don't know. And then, okay, that got somebody else's attention. Some other follower came along and said, that's for me. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to look at, spiritual leaders, and how they gain followers, and how much of that is, finding out your true sense of calling. I don't know. I'm not convinced that's in it at all.
Yeah. Well, the calling card, what is your calling? So what's your dance? I think one of the things that we can do in groups of people as awakened and awakening leaders is create a space where truth can be spoken, where it's where the uncensorship can happen, and where the genius of each uniqueness can actually weave into what needs to happen next.
Mm.
So it's that frame. Like the old paradigm is there's one answer and someone's got the right answer. Things are way too effing complex now, right?
Mhm.
So my sense of it is that we need to be in collective fields where the whole collective is a sense organ that not only holds collective intelligence, each person has a different piece of the puzzle. And this is where I think of Otto Scharmer and Peter saying, the theory U, that whole theory U and presencing,
Mhm.
friggin' brilliant. If you want to see a model of the new leadership, that's, I think, one of a beautiful illumination of it, where you work with the technical details, go below your habitual thoughts, right? I'm standing in this corner and I'm totally for this point of view, and it's the only point of view, and it's the right point of view, and all of you are idiots, right? Starting to let go of the certainty, dropping deeper into humility, and so that's a progression down into the bottom of the U. With our awakened capacities, we can hold that bottom of the U. That's when we enter mystery. That's what the bottom of the U is. We start with all the information that we know, facts and figures and data and research, dropping below our beliefs into the shared field. And then what wants to emerge? What are the next steps? And the next steps come from, this is Patricia Albert too, the we space. What are we sensing? And all of us are sense organs for the future,
Mhm.
for the emergence of the next step. And then learning how to sense, learning how to listen, how to bring that authentic movement that's coming through each body into a coalesced next step, and kind of coming back out. So that's just what popped into my head.
Yeah, no, I do like the idea of emergence. There's a leadership approach which is plan and act, and there's another one which is sense and respond. And I tend to just be more of a responder, uh, but then I can lead in that then that mode of response, right? But it comes to a sense and respond what's emerging at the moment, right? So I do like that. I do like that metaphor, presencing metaphor.
Well, in the planning and acting, there's still room for that. It's
Mhm.
just when we think that that's the only way to go, we get all, life will have its way.
Yeah, it's another one of those polarities, right? So pick your polarity, and then how do you dance in that polarity? I don't know.
And the ecstatic wildness at the heart, the intersection of all those polarities, that's the ecstatic. Truly, it's
Yeah.
the wildness at the heart of all of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think this was great.
I don't know where it went, or but yeah, that's kind of what's up for me. That's and that's what's swimming for me. But it's alive and it's juicy. I have this sense that more people want to have their uh, either consciously or unconsciously, if they're like me, at least they want to have holes poked in their perspective. The subversive element of it. How to subvert in a you know in the most effective compassionate way. I don't know what you might say there, but I think at heart I'm a subversive who's not hasn't figured out how to subvert, right. I'm busy subverting myself, but
Well,
so
that could
yeah.
be, maybe in 6 months or a year, we'll check in and see what lessons of subversion you've learned. We both learned. Well, thank you. Any closing remarks? I feel like we've.
No, we can kind of leave it there, and we can see what whether there's any gold to be mined in our conversation.
Hmm, yeah, thank you, Pat. I've thoroughly enjoyed this exchange and the rich territory, and all the questions that we are living that are living us. And may those questions and our human, what is I want to say, that the candor and humility with which we are kind of offering ourselves to this inquiry, may this be of service to whoever's watching this.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to put it.
All right. Bye for now.
All right.